The year was 1934. In a quiet schoolroom, the sound of spoons clinked against tin bowls. Steam rose from a thin tomato soup, curling through the cold morning air. Beside each bowl sat a glass of milk and a single slice of bread. For millions of American children, this was not a treat, it was survival. Few knew that these simple meals, bread, milk, and hope, were the result of one of the most ambitious social efforts in American history, the birth of the school lunch. The idea of feeding children at school wasn't new. Long before the Great Depression, there had been experiments, small, local, often fragile. In 1790, in Munich, Germany, a man named Benjamin Thompson, later known as Count Rumford, organized meals for poor children before they took lessons. They studied half the day and spent the other half sewing uniforms for the military. It was the first attempt to link education with nourishment, to teach the mind while feeding the body. By the 1860s, France followed. Writers and donors, including Victor Hugo, paid for lunches out of their own pockets. In 1867, the Minister of Public Instruction, Victor Duruy, made these programs official, expanding them to over 400 schools across the country. 10 years later, cantines scolaires, public school canteens, appeared throughout Paris, where rich and poor children sat together. To avoid shame, a ticket system was created, so no one knew who paid and who couldn't. The idea spread: Switzerland, Holland, Germany, England. In 1906, the British Parliament passed the Provision of Meals Act, guaranteeing that every child, rich or poor, could receive a suitable lunch. Those meals were hearty, often ending with simple puddings that carried the cheerful names of the time: a gypsy tart, a Manchester tart, or a steamed fruit pudding quaintly known as Spotted Dick. Across the ocean, the United States was slower to follow. In 1853, the Children's Aid Society of New York began offering meals at vocational schools for children living in poverty. Soon after came the penny lunches, hot meals sold for 1 cent in cities like Philadelphia and Boston. Even New York had its 3-penny lunch, proof that city life had always been expensive. But these programs were small and inconsistent. Most American children brought food from home, if they had any, and when parents worked long hours or couldn't afford extra bread, their children went hungry. By the early 1900s, reformers began to sound the alarm. In 1904, Robert Hunter, a social activist, published a book titled Poverty. He wrote that as many as 70,000 children in New York City arrived at school too hungry to learn. What is the use, he asked, of truancy laws that force them to attend class if hunger keeps them from understanding the lesson? Local programs appeared in over 40 cities, often cooking in central kitchens and delivering lunches by cart. But in rural America, teachers were on their own. In 1916, a woman named Nellie Wing Farnsworth wrote The Rural School Lunch, a guide for teachers trying to feed their students. She described how children would walk miles through snow, carrying small pails that froze solid before noon. Inside those pails were cold pancakes, salt pork, and bottles of tea, or even coffee, a common drink for children at the time. Teachers, she insisted, had to do better. They should neither serve tea nor coffee, but milk, water, or cocoa, and only occasionally, since cocoa was too stimulating. She listed everything a teacher needed: a blue flame oil stove, a portable oven, frying pans, paddles, beaters, and a double boiler. On a teacher's salary, that was nearly impossible. Her solution was what she called a school lunch shower. Mothers in the community were invited to bring utensils as gifts, an act of solidarity that blurred the line between charity and necessity. And she believed that children should eat together, at tables, not scattered across the room. That way they could learn manners, conversation, and pride. As she wrote, "Mothers will take more pains in putting up the lunch when they know it is to be exhibited before the teacher." It was a simple idea, but the storm of the 1930s would make it vital. When the stock market collapsed in 1929, so did everything else. Fathers lost jobs, mothers stood in lines for bread. Farmers had food they could not sell, while cities starved beside mountains of unsold crops. The country faced two crises at once: hunger in the cities, surplus on the farms. The solution would come from the same government program that built bridges and roads: the New Deal. Under new federal policy, Washington began buying surplus food from American farmers: butter, pork, wheat, beans, and sending it to schools. The goal was simple: feed the children, save the farmers, and put the unemployed back to work. Out of this plan came something new, and soon legendary: the lunch lady. Thousands of women, once jobless, now found work in school kitchens, ladling soup and milk to children who hadn't eaten in days. The meals were humble but warm: soup, bread, milk, sometimes even Salisbury steak when meat was plentiful. For a child of the Depression, lunch at school might be the only real meal of the day. And in the hum of those cafeterias, America found a fragile kind of hope. Then came war. By the early 1940s, food, once abundant, became rationed again. Beef, butter, sugar, and coffee disappeared from menus. Even schools shared the burden, serving canned vegetables, powdered milk, and whatever could stretch across hundreds of plates. The number of lunches shrank, but the idea survived. Everyone saw what happened when it vanished: tired, distracted children, classrooms growing quiet with hunger. So, in 1946, with peace newly restored, President Harry S. Truman signed the National School Lunch Act. He said, "No nation is any healthier than its children or more prosperous than its farmers." With that sentence, the lunchroom became an American institution. In the 1950s and 60s, the school cafeteria was born. Trays lined in rows, metal counters gleaming. Pizza, fish sticks, mashed potatoes served with ice cream scoops. A new rhythm of abundance replaced the memories of soup lines. But the pendulum kept swinging. By the 1970s and 80s, the spirit of nourishment gave way to profit. Private companies filled the vending machines with chips and candy. Nutrition guidelines slipped. And somewhere along the way, someone joked that ketchup counted as a vegetable. It never became policy, but the phrase stuck, a symbol of how far the ideal had drifted. Yet the idea never disappeared. Even today, millions of American children receive free or reduced lunches, a quiet echo of the Great Depression. The meals have changed, but the meaning hasn't. In France, children sit for a full meal: beef bourguignon, brie, fresh bread. In the United States, the portions are smaller, the ingredients simpler. But every carton of milk, every tray of soup carries a memory that began in the 1930s, when a nation decided that no child should learn on an empty stomach. Bread, milk, hope. the taste of survival, and the beginning of compassion served warm in a bowl. Sometimes history isn't written in books or laws. Sometimes it's written in the steam that rises from a bowl of soup and the quiet gratitude of a child who finally eats.